To the old lady who still won't let go of Dad's money, my son said as he raised his wine glass on my 86th birthday, and everyone around the table laughed nervously while I sat there smiling as if my heart hadn't just cracked a little. My name is Margaret Whitmore, and until that evening, I believed I knew exactly who my family was. Looking back now, I realized that dinner was not a celebration at all. It was a test, and my family failed it. The dining room glowed with warm light from the crystal chandelier hanging above the long oak table. I had spent the afternoon arranging flowers myself, even though my arthritis made my fingers ache whenever I handled anything delicate. White roses filled the center of the table. My late husband Robert used to bring me white roses every birthday. He had been gone for 6 years, but I still found comfort in keeping certain traditions alive. The smell of roasted turkey, fresh rolls, and cinnamon pie filled the house. Outside, the October air had already turned cold, and yellow leaves drifted across the backyard. Inside, I had hoped for something simple. A family dinner. A few kind words. Maybe a memory or two about Robert. Instead, I received a lesson. My son Daniel arrived nearly 40 minutes late with his wife Vanessa. The moment he stepped through the front door, I noticed the smell of alcohol. Not enough to make a scene, but enough to loosen his tongue. Vanessa wore an expensive smile that never quite reached her eyes. She kissed my cheek and handed me a gift bag. Daniel barely looked at me before heading toward the dining room. The evening began pleasantly enough. My grandson Ethan sat beside me and asked about old family stories. We laughed about the time Robert accidentally backed his truck into our mailbox. For a few minutes, everything felt normal. Then the wine bottles emptied. Daniel grew louder. His jokes became sharper. His comments carried an edge I had learned to recognize over the years. It was the edge of resentment. Dessert arrived. 86 candles would have been ridiculous, so Ethan had placed a single candle in the center of my cake. Everyone sang. I smiled. I made a wish. Then Daniel stood. He lifted his glass. The room grew quiet. I'd like to make a toast, he announced. Vanessa smiled before he even spoke. That should have warned me. Daniel looked directly at me. To the old lady who still won't let go of Dad's money. A few uncomfortable chuckles floated around the table. Someone coughed. Ethan stared down at his plate. Daniel laughed as if he had said something clever. Seriously, he continued. Dad's been gone 6 years. At some point, maybe it's time to stop holding on so tightly. I felt every eye in the room shift toward me. The house suddenly seemed very quiet. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded louder than usual. Tick, tick, tick. I could have argued. I could have defended myself. Instead, I smiled. I picked up my coffee cup and took a small sip. Daniel mistook my silence for weakness. That was his first mistake. The conversation moved on, but the evening never recovered. People avoided eye contact. Vanessa spent the rest of the meal looking pleased with herself. Ethan barely spoke another word. By 9 o'clock, everyone was gone. The dishes remained on the table. Half the cake sat untouched. The house felt larger than it had that morning. I stood alone in the kitchen and stared through the window into the darkness beyond the backyard. For a long time, I simply listened to the silence. Then I remembered something Robert had told me years earlier. It came back so clearly that it felt as though he were standing beside me. Maggie, he had said one evening, if the day ever comes when the people closest to you care more about what you own than who you are, there's something in the safe I want you to find. I hadn't thought about those words in years. Suddenly, I couldn't stop thinking about them. The next morning, while the sun rose over the maple trees outside my bedroom window, I walked into Robert's old study. My hands trembled slightly as I knelt beside the built-in wall safe hidden behind a framed photograph. I entered the combination I had not used in 6 years. The lock clicked. The heavy steel door slowly opened. Inside was a single sealed envelope. Across the front, written in Robert's familiar handwriting, were 7 words that changed everything. Open only if the family betrays you. For several seconds, I simply stared at the envelope resting in my hands. The paper had yellowed slightly with age, and the familiar slope of Robert's handwriting instantly pulled me back through decades of memories. He had always believed in preparation. He planned road trips months in advance, kept detailed records of every major purchase, and somehow always seemed to know what problems were coming long before anyone else noticed them. Slowly, I carried the envelope to his old desk and sat in the leather chair where he used to spend quiet evenings balancing accounts or reading newspapers. The room still smelled faintly of cedar and old books. Outside the window, the morning sun was climbing higher, casting long shadows across the lawn. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter and a smaller sealed packet attached with a paper clip. I unfolded the letter first. "My dearest Maggie," it began. Immediately, tears blurred my vision. Robert had always called me Maggie. No one else did. I took a slow breath and continued reading. "If you are opening this, then something has happened that I prayed never would. It means the people we loved have started looking at our lives through the wrong lens. Not through family, but through entitlement." I stopped reading for a moment. Entitlement. The word lingered in my mind. Daniel's face flashed before me. The toast. The laughter. The bitterness I had seen growing inside him for years. Robert's words continued. "If that day comes, I need you to remember something. You have never owed anyone an inheritance. You have only ever owed them love, honesty, and kindness. Everything else was a gift." I leaned back in the chair. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily. For the first time since my birthday dinner, I felt something other than hurt. I felt clarity. As I continued reading, Robert described conversations we had shared years earlier. Moments I had nearly forgotten. He wrote about the summer evenings on our back porch. About teaching Ethan how to fish at the lake. About the promises we made to protect each other even after one of us was gone. Then the tone of the letter changed. There are things I noticed before I passed away that troubled me. Daniel became increasingly interested in what I owned rather than what I believed. Vanessa encouraged that thinking more than once. "I never told you because I hoped I was wrong." My stomach tightened. Robert had seen it too, long before I had been willing to admit it. I read every line carefully. Every word felt deliberate. Near the bottom of the final page, he wrote, "The attached packet contains information that Olivia Grant has safeguarded for years. Do not open it until you have spoken with her. Trust her. She knows exactly what to do. Olivia, our family attorney." I had not spoken to her in almost 3 years. Robert had trusted her completely. At the very end of the letter, one final sentence was underlined. "Whatever happens next, do not be afraid of disappointing people who are disappointed only because they cannot control you." I folded the letter slowly and held it against my chest. The silence inside the study felt different now. Not lonely, not empty, purposeful. Then I looked at the smaller sealed packet clipped behind the letter. Across the front, in Olivia's handwriting, were 6 words that made my pulse quicken. "For Margaret. Open only after meeting." I set the packet back on the desk. Whatever was inside could wait. Robert had left instructions, and for 42 years of marriage, following his judgment had never led me wrong. I reached for the telephone, found Olivia's number in my address book, and dialed. When she answered, there was a brief pause before she spoke. "Margaret," she said quietly, "I was wondering when I might hear from you. Olivia asked me to come to her office that afternoon." Her voice carried a seriousness that stayed with me long after the call ended. By noon, I was driving across town, passing familiar streets that suddenly felt different. Perhaps it was because Robert's letter had changed something inside me. For years, I had been making excuses for Daniel. I blamed stress. I blamed financial pressure. I blamed bad timing. Sitting alone in my car, I began wondering how many warning signs I had ignored simply because he was my son. Olivia's office occupied the second floor of a red brick building near the courthouse. Robert and I had visited countless times over the years. The receptionist recognized me immediately and offered a warm smile. A few minutes later, Olivia appeared at the end of the hallway carrying a thick folder. The moment she saw me, her expression softened. "Margaret," she said quietly, "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." Inside her office, sunlight streamed through tall windows overlooking Main Street. I sat across from her desk while she carefully placed the folder between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Olivia looked directly into my eyes. "Did you open Robert's letter?" she asked. I nodded. Every word. She sighed gently. "Then you already know he was concerned." Hearing someone else confirm it made my chest tighten. "How concerned?" I asked. Olivia opened the folder. Inside were dated notes, letters, and documents. Some were more than 7 years old. "Robert never wanted conflict in the family," she began. But he was observant. He noticed patterns. She slid one document toward me. It was a memo written after a meeting she had held with Robert. I recognized his signature immediately. He spoke often about Daniel's growing fixation on inheritance, Olivia explained. At first, he hoped it was temporary. My eyes moved across the page. Robert had written that family wealth should strengthen relationships, not replace them. Another document revealed concerns about repeated conversations regarding the house, investment accounts, and trust assets. None of it was dramatic. None of it was explosive. That was what made it unsettling. The pattern stretched across years. Quiet comments. Subtle pressure. Questions that always seemed to lead back to money. I remember one Christmas, I said slowly. Daniel spent nearly an hour asking Robert about property values. Olivia nodded. There were many moments like that. As we continued talking, memories surfaced one after another. Daniel insisting we downsize immediately after Robert's retirement. Vanessa suggesting that maintaining the house was becoming irresponsible. Casual jokes about future inheritances that no one else seemed to find funny. At the time, I had brushed them aside. Looking back, they fit together like pieces of a puzzle. Olivia reached into the folder and removed another sealed envelope. This one looked newer than the others. "This is the packet Robert instructed me to keep secure," she said. "Before you open it, there is something else you should know." Her tone changed. It became firmer, more cautious. 3 months ago, Daniel contacted my office. I felt my stomach drop. "Why?" Olivia folded her hands. "He wanted information about the estate. Specifically, he wanted to know whether certain assets could be transferred sooner rather than later." The room suddenly felt very quiet. 3 months ago, long before the birthday dinner, long before the cruel toast, Daniel had already been planning something. I stared at the sealed envelope resting on the desk between us. The answers I had been searching for were finally within reach. But for the first time, I was not afraid of what I might discover. I was afraid of how much of it Robert had already seen coming. For several moments, neither Olivia nor I spoke. The sealed envelope sat between us like a bridge connecting the past to the present. Finally, I reached forward and carefully opened it. Inside were several documents and a handwritten note from Robert. I recognized his handwriting immediately. The sight of it brought an unexpected ache to my chest. It had been 6 years since I had seen him sign his name. 6 years since I had heard his voice echo through our home. Yet somehow, sitting in Olivia's office, he felt closer than he had in years. I unfolded the note first. "Maggie, if you are reading this, then certain concerns of mine may have become reality. Before you react emotionally, I need you to understand something. What follows is not punishment. It is protection." I continued reading. Robert explained that during the final years of his life, he had quietly restructured much of our estate. Not because he distrusted family, but because he understood human nature. Wealth could reveal parts of people that remained hidden during easier times. The accompanying documents outlined trusts, restrictions, and conditions that I had never fully understood before. Olivia patiently explained each section. Certain assets could never be transferred without my consent. Certain properties could not be sold while I was living. Most surprising of all, Robert had created safeguards designed to prevent outside pressure from influencing those decisions. "He wanted your security protected above everything else," Olivia said softly. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Then I noticed another document near the bottom of the stack. It contained recent notes. Much more recent. My eyes moved down the page. Dates from the previous year. References to inquiries. Requests for information. Attempts to estimate values. Daniel's name appeared repeatedly. A strange sadness settled over me. Not anger. Not yet. Just sadness. Because as I read those pages, I realized this story had not begun at my birthday dinner. It had been unfolding quietly for years. I remembered family gatherings where Daniel seemed distracted whenever conversations drifted away from finances. I remembered Vanessa asking detailed questions about investment accounts she had no reason to know about. I remembered casual remarks that never felt quite right. At the time, I dismissed them. Families say awkward things. People make mistakes. Mothers forgive. That is what mothers do. But sitting there with evidence spread across Olivia's desk, I could no longer pretend the pattern did not exist. "There is something else," Olivia said carefully. She opened another folder. "I debated whether to show you this today." She slid several printed emails across the desk. They were professional messages exchanged months earlier. My eyes moved slowly across the text. Daniel had been requesting meetings, requesting estimates, asking hypothetical questions about future distributions. None of it violated any rules. None of it was illegal. But the timing spoke volumes. 3 months ago. 4 months ago. 5 months ago. Long before his cruel remarks at dinner. Long before his public embarrassment of me. He had already been focused on the same thing. I sat quietly, absorbing everything. Outside the office window, people moved along Main Street carrying shopping bags and coffee cups. Ordinary lives continued as usual. Meanwhile, the image I carried of my own family was slowly changing shape. "What are you thinking?" Olivia asked. I looked down at Robert's note again. One sentence stood out above all the others. "What follows is not punishment. It is protection." For the first time, I understood what he meant. This was never about controlling anyone. It was about preserving dignity, preserving independence, preserving peace. I carefully gathered the documents into a neat stack. Then I looked up at Olivia. "I think Robert knew exactly what he was doing," I said quietly. Olivia gave a small nod. "So do I." Then she hesitated before adding one final sentence. "Margaret, there is someone else who contacted my office recently. Someone who may know much more than you realize." My pulse quickened slightly. "Who?" Olivia met my eyes. "Your grandson, Ethan." Ethan called me that evening, just as the sun was setting behind the maple trees in my backyard. The sky glowed orange and gold, and for a brief moment, everything outside looked peaceful. Inside, my thoughts were anything but peaceful. I had spent the drive home replaying Olivia's words over and over. Your grandson, Ethan. Of all the people involved in this situation, Ethan was the last person I expected to hear connected to any of it. He had always been different from his father. More thoughtful, more patient, more like Robert. When the phone rang, I answered immediately. His voice sounded hesitant. "Grandma, do you have time to talk?" I told him I did. 20 minutes later, he was sitting across from me at my kitchen table, turning a coffee mug slowly between his hands. The same kitchen where Robert and I had spent decades sharing breakfasts, celebrating holidays, and helping raise a family that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Ethan looked tired. Not physically tired. Emotionally tired. Like someone carrying a burden that had become too heavy. For several moments he said nothing. Then he finally looked up. "I think I owe you an apology." The words caught me off guard. "For what?" I asked. Gently. He lowered his eyes. "For not telling you sooner." My stomach tightened. Ethan took a slow breath before continuing. "Grandma, there have been conversations. A lot of conversations. Dad and Vanessa have been talking about your house, your accounts, and Grandpa's estate for a long time." Hearing it from him hurt more than reading it in documents. Paper felt distant. Ethan felt real. "How long?" I asked quietly. "At least 2 years," he admitted. I stared at the steam rising from my coffee. 2 years. While I was hosting family dinners. While I was buying birthday gifts. While I was believing we were still a family held together by love. Ethan continued. "At first I thought it was normal. People talk about money sometimes. But it kept happening. Every holiday. Every family gathering. Somehow the conversation always came back to what you owned." His voice carried disappointment rather than anger. That somehow made it harder to hear. He explained that over the past year the discussions had become more frequent, more focused, more urgent. Daniel had apparently convinced himself that certain assets should already belong to him. Vanessa encouraged those beliefs whenever she could. Neither of them seemed interested in why Robert had structured things the way he did. They only cared that obstacles stood between them and what they wanted. "There is something else," Ethan said. He hesitated again. "A few weeks ago I overheard them talking. I remained silent. Dad said that after your birthday, he planned to push harder. He said you were getting older and would eventually have to give in." The kitchen suddenly felt colder. Not because of the words themselves. Because of the certainty behind them. My 86th birthday had not been a celebration. It had been part of a strategy. Ethan looked miserable as he spoke. "I should have told you earlier. Grandpa always said integrity means doing the right thing before it becomes easy. I failed at that." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "No," I said softly. "You are here now." For the first time that evening, his expression eased slightly. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and removed a folded sheet of paper. "There is one more thing you need to see." He slid it across the table toward me. As I unfolded the page, I immediately recognized my son's handwriting. My hands felt strangely calm as I unfolded the paper. After everything I had learned during the previous 24 hours, I expected another disappointment. What I did not expect was how ordinary the document looked. It was not a legal filing. It was not a financial statement. It was a handwritten list. At the top, in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting, were the words future estate planning discussion. I read the first few lines slowly. The house, the lake property, investment accounts, personal collections, family heirlooms. Each item had notes beside it. Suggested values, possible uses, potential sale estimates. My throat tightened. Robert's antique watch collection was listed beside projected auction prices. The dining room furniture we had purchased during our first year of marriage had a resale estimate. Even personal items carried notes. It felt less like family planning and more like inventory. Ethan watched my expression carefully. I found it accidentally, he said. Dad left it on his desk one afternoon. I took a picture because something felt wrong. I continued reading. Halfway down the page, a sentence caught my attention. It was underlined twice. Need to convince Mom that managing everything alone is becoming unrealistic. I stared at those words longer than I should have. Convince Mom. Not help Mom. Not support Mom. Convince Mom. The distinction mattered. I folded the paper carefully and placed it on the table. The kitchen remained quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock above the stove. Ethan looked relieved, as though sharing the burden had lifted something from his shoulders. There is more, he said quietly. A few weeks ago, Vanessa suggested organizing a family meeting. She said everyone should discuss long-term plans before a crisis happens. I almost smiled. The phrase sounded responsible on the surface. Practical. Caring, even. Yet after everything I had learned, I heard the real meaning beneath the words. They were preparing the ground, creating a narrative, building pressure. Robert had seen it years ago. Olivia had documented it. Ethan had witnessed it. And I had finally stopped looking away. Grandma, Ethan said carefully, what are you going to do? I looked around the kitchen. The curtains Robert helped me hang 15 years earlier still framed the window above the sink. The wooden table still carried faint marks from family dinners, school projects, and holiday baking sessions. Every corner of the room held memories. Not because of money, because of life. I am going to do exactly what your grandfather hoped I would do, I answered. Ethan tilted his head slightly. And what is that? I thought about Robert's letter. Protection, not punishment. The words returned once again. I am going to stay calm. Ethan smiled faintly. That sounds like Grandpa. After he left, I remained at the table for nearly an hour. Darkness settled outside. The kitchen lights reflected softly against the windows. For the first time since my birthday dinner, I no longer felt confused. Hurt, yes. Sad, certainly. But not confused. The pieces finally fit together. The comments. The questions. The pressure. The toast. None of it had happened by accident. Yet something else became clear as I sat there. Daniel believed he understood the situation. Vanessa believed she understood it too. They thought they were moving toward a victory that had already been decided. They had no idea that Robert had spent years preparing for exactly this possibility. The next morning, my telephone rang shortly after breakfast. The caller identification displayed Olivia's number. When I answered, her voice carried an urgency I had not heard before. Margaret, she said, I just received notice that Daniel has formally requested a family meeting for this weekend. I believe you should know why. Olivia did not waste time with small talk. The moment I answered, I could hear papers moving on her desk. Daniel contacted several people this morning, she said, including my office. I remained silent. He is presenting the meeting as a family discussion about your future care and long-term planning. The wording sounded harmless. Concerned. Responsible. Yet after everything I had learned, I heard the strategy hidden underneath. Long-term planning. Future care. Those phrases created a picture of an elderly woman who could no longer manage her own affairs. The reality was that I still drove myself across town, maintained my home, balanced my finances, and handled my own appointments. I was 86 years old, not helpless. Who is attending? I asked. Olivia consulted her notes. Daniel. Vanessa. A financial advisor they recently contacted. Possibly 2 extended family members. And they specifically requested that you attend. I almost laughed. The confidence behind the invitation told me everything. Daniel believed the momentum was on his side. He thought years of pressure had finally brought him to the finish line. Olivia's voice softened. Margaret, I want you to understand something. You are under no obligation to agree to anything discussed at that meeting. I know, I replied. And for the first time, I truly did know. After we ended the call, I walked through the house slowly. The living room, the dining room, Robert's study. Everywhere I looked, I saw evidence of a life built over decades. Not wealth, not assets, a life. The distinction mattered more than ever now. Later that afternoon, Daniel called. His tone was unusually cheerful. "Mom, I wanted to check on you." The concern sounded rehearsed. "That is kind of you," I said. "How are you feeling after your birthday?" I could almost hear him testing the waters, waiting to see whether I would mention the toast, whether I would confront him. I did neither. "I am doing well." A brief pause followed. Then he shifted toward his real purpose. "Vanessa and I have been thinking about the future. We thought it might be helpful to get everyone together this weekend. Just a family conversation. Nothing serious. Nothing serious." I stared out the kitchen window as yellow leaves drifted across the lawn. "That sounds nice," I replied. He seemed surprised by how easily I agreed. "You will come?" "Of course." Another pause. This one longer. He had expected resistance. Instead, I had given him none. After the call ended, I sat quietly at the table. Robert used to say that people often reveal the most when they believe they have already won. Daniel sounded exactly like a man who believed victory was close. The following 2 days passed calmly. Too calmly. I watered my garden, read in the evenings, shared coffee with Ethan. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inwardly, everything had. On Friday afternoon, Ethan stopped by again. "Are you really going?" he asked. "Yes." He looked worried. "Dad thinks this meeting is going to settle things." I smiled gently. "I know. And that does not concern you?" For a moment, I thought about Robert's letters, Olivia's files, and the protections quietly waiting in the background. Then I thought about something even more important. The truth. "No," I said. Because people who build plans around false assumptions eventually discover how fragile those plans really are. Ethan studied me carefully before a small smile appeared on his face. "You sound exactly like Grandpa." That night, as I prepared for bed, my telephone buzzed with a new message. It was from Vanessa. The message was brief, polite, carefully worded. She wrote that everyone was looking forward to seeing me and discussing what was best for the family moving forward. I read the message twice before setting the phone aside. Then I looked at the framed photograph on my nightstand. Robert stood beside me in front of the house we had loved for so many years. His smile seemed almost knowing. The meeting was less than 24 hours away. Daniel believed he was gathering the family to secure his future. What he did not realize was that the future he imagined no longer existed. Saturday arrived with clear skies and cool autumn air. I drove to the meeting location just after noon. Daniel had chosen a private conference room at a country club on the edge of town. The choice did not surprise me. Everything about the event had been designed to appear professional and responsible. When I entered the room, everyone was already there. Daniel stood near the windows speaking with a financial advisor. Vanessa sat at the long table reviewing papers. 2 distant relatives occupied seats near the far end. Ethan sat quietly by himself. The moment I walked in, conversations paused. Daniel immediately stepped forward with a practiced smile. "Mom, I am glad you came." I returned the smile. I would not have missed a family gathering. For the next several minutes, everyone exchanged polite greetings. Coffee was poured. Chairs scraped against the floor. The atmosphere felt strangely formal. Eventually, Daniel cleared his throat and took control of the room. He spoke confidently. He talked about planning, responsibility, future challenges. He described the burdens that came with maintaining property at my age. He spoke as though he were presenting a thoughtful solution rather than pursuing a personal goal. Several times he emphasized how much he cared about my well-being. Vanessa nodded at every opportunity. The financial advisor contributed charts and projections. Together, they painted a picture of an elderly woman struggling to manage a complicated estate. The strange thing was that none of them asked what I actually wanted. Nearly 40 minutes passed before Daniel finally turned toward me. "Mom, we all believe simplifying things would be best. Selling certain properties, restructuring assets, and creating a transition plan would reduce stress for everyone." Everyone. Not me. Everyone. I folded my hands calmly in my lap. "That is an interesting perspective," I said. Relief flashed across Daniel's face. He mistook my calmness for agreement. "I knew you would understand," he replied. Then he pushed a folder across the table. "These are preliminary recommendations." I looked at the folder, but did not touch it. Instead, I glanced toward the door. Right on schedule, it opened. Olivia walked inside carrying a leather briefcase. The room instantly changed. Daniel's smile disappeared. Vanessa sat up straighter. The financial advisor looked confused. Olivia greeted everyone politely before taking the empty seat beside me. I hope I am not interrupting, she said. Silence answered her. Daniel recovered first. Why is our family attorney here? Olivia placed her briefcase on the table. Because Margaret requested that I attend. The confidence that had filled the room only minutes earlier began to fade. Daniel attempted to continue his presentation, but the momentum was gone. Olivia listened patiently while he explained his proposals. When he finished, she opened her briefcase and removed several documents. Before any further discussion takes place, she said calmly, there are facts that should be clarified. One by one, she presented the estate structures Robert had established years earlier. Trust protections, property restrictions, legal safeguards, conditions that prevented forced transfers or unwanted asset sales. The more she explained, the quieter the room became. Daniel's expression shifted from confidence to confusion. Vanessa's face lost color. The assumptions they had built their plans upon were disappearing in front of them. Then Olivia presented Robert's letters and supporting documentation. She explained that these protections had been intentionally designed long before any recent conversations occurred. Robert had anticipated pressure. He had prepared accordingly. No anger entered Olivia's voice. No accusations. Only facts. Clear. Precise. Unavoidable. I looked around the table. For the first time, no one was speaking on my behalf. No one was speaking over me. The truth was doing all the work. Then Olivia opened one final folder and said, there is one more matter we need to address before this meeting concludes. The room remained silent as Olivia opened the final folder. No one interrupted her. No one challenged her. The confidence that had filled the conference room at the beginning of the meeting had completely disappeared. Olivia removed a single document and placed it on the table. Several years ago, she began, Robert included an additional provision that has never been discussed publicly. Daniel leaned forward. Vanessa stared at the papers without speaking. Olivia continued. Robert believed that financial inheritance was important, but he believed family character was even more important. Because of that belief, he created a separate family legacy trust. I listened quietly. This was the one section Robert had never fully explained to me. Olivia looked directly at Daniel. The trust contains resources intended for future generations. However, access depends on meeting specific conditions regarding conduct, respect, and family responsibility. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? Olivia opened another page. It means Robert wanted his legacy to strengthen the family, not divide it. She then read several passages from Robert's written instructions. They spoke about gratitude, integrity, compassion, personal accountability. The words sounded exactly like him. Calm, thoughtful, unshakable. Then Olivia reached the final page. One condition states that any beneficiary who engages in sustained attempts to pressure, manipulate, or undermine another family member regarding inheritance matters may lose access to future distributions at the trustee's discretion. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence felt heavier than any argument could have. Daniel looked stunned. Vanessa stared at the table. The financial advisor slowly closed his notebook. Ethan sat perfectly still. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. Are you saying Dad expected this? Olivia answered carefully. I am saying Robert spent years preparing for possibilities he hoped would never occur. For the first time all afternoon, Daniel looked less angry than confused, as though he had suddenly realized he had misunderstood his father completely. He had spent years focusing on assets while Robert had been focused on values. He had measured inheritance in dollars while Robert had measured it in character. The difference could not have been clearer. After several moments, Daniel turned toward me. Mom. The words sounded unfamiliar coming from him now. Not because it was insincere, because it carried uncertainty instead of entitlement. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. I saw the little boy who used to ride bicycles in the driveway. The teenager who stayed up late talking with Robert about baseball. The young man who once promised he would always put family first. Somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of those things. Perhaps greed had played a role. Perhaps fear. Perhaps disappointment. In the end, the reason no longer mattered as much as the result. You thought this was about money, I said quietly. It never was. No one interrupted. The house was never the inheritance. The accounts were never the inheritance. The real inheritance was everything your father spent a lifetime trying to teach. Daniel lowered his eyes. Ethan looked toward the window. Vanessa remained silent. I stood slowly from my chair. At 86, standing takes a little longer than it once did. Yet I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I had won. Because I finally understood. Robert had protected more than property. He had protected the truth. I gathered my purse and prepared to leave. Before I reached the door, Ethan stood and walked beside me. No words were necessary. His presence said enough. As we stepped outside into the cool afternoon air, sunlight stretched across the parking lot. The trees were turning gold. A gentle breeze carried fallen leaves across the pavement. For a moment, I closed my eyes and thought of Robert. Then I smiled. Not the smile I wore at my birthday dinner. Not the smile I used to hide pain. A real smile. The kind that comes when confusion finally gives way to clarity. Some people spend their lives chasing an inheritance. Others spend their lives becoming worthy of one. Robert understood the difference. And in the end, that lesson was worth more than anything he could have left behind.